On behalf of the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence, I welcome everyone to today's program. The program is Ontario in the FastLane, Accelerating AI-Fueled Growth for Ontario's Fast-Growing Companies. I am Garth Gibson, Vector's President and CEO, and I'm excited by the potential FastLane can offer Canadian jobs, competitiveness, and economic growth, made possible by effective utilization of a key business capability, artificial intelligence. In a moment, we'll hear from Vector's board chair, Ed Clark, and then from the Honorable Vic Fedeli, Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, followed by a panel of experts. While we all may be in different locations today, I wanted to pause to acknowledge the land on which Vector is located in Toronto and is now a meeting place of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, as well as newcomers to Canada from around the globe. We acknowledge that the land is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Today, we start with Ed Clark's thoughts on the economic importance and potential of AI in Canadian business. Ed is the chair of the board at the Vector Institute, and he's one of our founders. He's best known as the former group president and chief executive officer of the TD Bank Group, retiring in 2014. Ed has been widely recognized. He has been inducted into the Canadian Business Hall of Fame and made an officer of the Order of Canada. Barron's magazine listed him in the world's 30 best CEOs twice. He has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Toronto and an MA and PhD from Harvard University, as well as honorary degrees from Mount Ellison, Queen's, Western, Toronto, York, Ryerson universities. Today, in addition to Vector's board, Ed serves on the boards of the Brookings Institute and Thomson Reuters, among others. Ed, please turn on your microphone and share your thoughts with us.
Terrific. Thanks, Garth. It's great to be here. Before we get into our program, I thought we'd take a few minutes to talk about the history and the role of Vector, which is in some sense actually rather unique. And that uniqueness reflects both its purpose and its funding. So let me start with purpose. The Vector Institute has three goals. First, to be among the top institutes in the world in theoretical AI. And we have achieved that, and we can continue to strengthen the organization. Second, we set out to help Canadian institutions, both public institutions and private sector firms, to be better at using AI than their counterparts in the world. And thirdly, we wanted to help the enormous number of small and medium-sized firms to use AI to allow them to grow into world-class businesses based here in Canada. And obviously, this is one of the reasons we are here today. But some of you may not know that Vector is also distinct in how it's funded. Broadly speaking, Vector is 1/3 funded by the federal government, 1/3 by the province of Ontario, and 1/3 by the private sector. The bulk of the funding from the federal government is focused on that first goal of helping Vector to become one of the top institutes in the world for AI research. More recently, the federal government has initiated programs to help organizations, private sector in particular, to adopt AI. The provincial money has primarily gone to three areas: creating a workforce with AI skills, helping the health sector to use AI, both to save lives, but also to be more efficient and effective, and then to help firms, both large and small, use AI to be more competitive so they can grow the economy and create more jobs. The private sector has endorsed these goals, particularly that focus on making firms more competitive. Indeed, the private sector has essentially matched Vector's funding from the province of Ontario. Now, this is unique in the world. As you know, companies don't give away money easily. We have just concluded a round of discussions with our sponsors, and I was encouraged to hear their strong support for Vector and the clear understanding that AI isn't just about creating high-tech jobs, it's about creating good jobs for the larger population. Its biggest contribution will be how it transforms existing companies and makes them more productive so they can compete within and outside Canada, pay higher wages, and increase the size of their workforce. They are putting money where their mouth is because they know that for most Ontario companies to compete in the future, they will have to adopt AI. To do that, they will need talent. With Vector's guidance and provision of scholarships, we now have a proliferation of AI master's programs across the province that are training almost 1,000 AI master's graduates for businesses. Through Vector's FastLane program, we will also be holding 3 Introduction to AI courses in the new year, aimed at business executives from small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as individuals from large enterprises and non-technical AI functions. In early 2020, the province also supported the deployment of health AI solutions in hospital and public settings through an initiative called Smart Health, which was run by the Vector Institute. At 30 hospitals across Ontario, we have developed combined clinical databases that are going to allow us to find new ways to improve service and healthcare. As an example of working with conventional companies to make them more competitive is a firm called Mycionics. It provides automated mushroom farming solutions to southwestern Ontario farms. Before working with Vector, they hadn't been applying AI within their operations. But after working with Vector's engineering team, they were able to identify several use cases for AI adoption, such as using computer vision to improve their robot picking software. Deploying it increases crop productivity. Or take the Canvas-based AI, whose focus on enabling industrial companies to transform their operations. Through access to Vector's research programs, they'll be able to accelerate their global growth strategy and access needed AI talent. Finally, a last example that will hit home, I think, with this audience is what we've learned from the CTO at one of Vector's FastLane companies, Pitstop. He described how difficult it is for business owners to remain competitive and stay up to date on the latest AI best practices, while at the same time, balancing the daily challenges of actually running the business. That is why Pitstop is working with Vector's AI engineers to help them solve challenges of how they're using AI and allowing Pitstop to stay focused on growing their business. We look forward to hearing more from our FastLane panelist participants today about how they see AI. But before you do, you should know that the world has taken notice of us. Over $2 billion in venture capital investments have flown into Ontario's ecosystem in 2021. Good news for our FastLane companies, as well as for all small and medium enterprises across Ontario. Recently, the Brookings Institute report on global AI also called out that Vector, quote, represents one of the most ambitious efforts in North America to upgrade a strong ecosystem to make it in a strong world-class position. Now I'd like to turn to a video from our special guest, a friend and supporter of Vector, Minister Vic Fedeli, Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade Minister. I do want to take this moment to express on behalf of Vector and its entire community our gratitude to the province of Ontario. I can say, honestly, we would not be here today without the province's support. And we know, as a businessman, Vic, you get our important role. Vic Fedeli is a lifelong entrepreneur, successful business person, author, philanthropist. His business experience led his Fedeli Corporation to be ranked 34th in the top 50 best places to work in Canada. His business skills served him well when he was elected to 2 terms as mayor of North Bay from 2003 to 2010. And he's now serving his 3rd term as MPP for Nipissing. The work we are doing to develop Ontario's AI workforce and the support of medium and small businesses is an important part of strengthening Ontario's innovation ecosystem and its economy. and this would not be possible without the province's support. On behalf of Vector, we thank the province and are delighted to hear from Vic Fedeli today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and greetings on behalf of Premier Ford and the Government of Ontario. Businesses and organizations of all types and sizes really stepped up through the course of this pandemic. One of our top priorities remains making Ontario open for business, and that means creating and protecting jobs, supporting businesses, and increasing investment in trade so that our economy can grow and thrive as we continue the fight against COVID-19 together. And now, more than ever, we're looking to the future towards Ontario's economic recovery. Vector has an important role to play in how we get there. Thanks to their efforts over the past 4 years, Ontario has cemented its place as a global leader in artificial intelligence. And with more than 300 artificial intelligence firms already calling Ontario home, our government is committed to building it up even further. We have post-secondary institutions such as the University of Toronto and University of Waterloo making fantastic advancements in AI and producing incredible talent. And we're very proud to have the headquarters of the Vector Institute here in Toronto. Thank you for advancing the research, adoption, and commercialization of artificial intelligence. These advancements are strengthening some of our core sectors, including manufacturing, automotive, and healthcare. And Premier Ford and our government know that it's essential for Ontario companies to adopt advanced technologies to compete and thrive in a highly competitive global economy. And that includes small businesses. In fact, they make up over 97% of all businesses in Ontario and are an essential source of employment for people in every community across the province. It's vital that we support them, and that's why we are pleased with the launch of the Vector FastLane program for small and medium-sized businesses. This will provide opportunities for SMEs to capitalize on the transformative power of artificial intelligence. And we hear that 50 Ontario companies have already joined the program, looking to build critical AI capabilities and access to top AI talent. And that is simply fantastic news. The FastLane program is good for our business community and it's good for our province. And harnessing the potential of AI will help drive Ontario's economic growth for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Fedeli, for your thoughts on the important role of the Vector Institute and its FastLane program in the advancement of Ontario jobs, talent, and the transformative power of AI on business competitiveness. So what does this mean for you as a small business owner or employee? First of all, know that by being part of this event and attending Vector FastLane program events, such as our Intro to AI course, it's kicking off in the new year, you are an important part of the dynamic and growing ecosystem. You are upskilling yourself and you are to be part of Ontario's future workforce. We also encourage you to make the most of your interactions today. Lean in when it's question time at the end of the panel and ask questions. Then contact us after this event if you want to learn more how you can be part of the FastLane program. We have an exciting panel today with representatives from fast-growing companies using AI in a number of ways. To moderate the discussion, I would like to introduce our moderator, Takara Small. Takara is a Toronto-based technology journalist and an entrepreneur herself, much like our panelists. She works as an on-air technology contributor to the BBC World News Service, a columnist for Metro Morning, and TV contributor for CBC's national news show, Canada Tonight. Her written and broadcast work has been featured in many publications, and over the years, Takara has been recognized by a variety of local and international organizations, including being named one of the 100 most powerful women in Canada. We're very excited to have her join us today and help us moderate the panel. Welcome, Takara. Please turn on your microphone and take over.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. Hello, everyone from wherever you're watching. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Vector Institute, for hosting this amazing event. Before we jump in, I just want to go over a few logistics. As it's already been said in the chat, make sure to add your questions to the Q&A box, which many of you have already done. So I'm very excited when we get to that session. Also, the hashtag is AI FastLane. And I think the really great thing for you all to participate in is after this chat, please continue to engage online, share. I know myself personally, I'm very much on Twitter. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out there and I'd love to engage. Okay, now to the good stuff. Very exciting panel as has already been shared. I'm going to introduce them and give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about themselves. So first we have Gus Miner, we have Janet Bannister, Jen McLean, Michael Cohen, who will be joining us for a very engaging discussion about AI. Thank you, panelists, for joining today. I'm going to throw it to Gus first to tell us a little bit about himself, and we'll continue on after that.
Hi, thank you very much, Takara. I'm happy to be here today and learning more from everyone else as well as we will have great conversations. I'm currently the Chief Innovation Officer at Sophie Inc., where we're building solutions to keep the workplace safe and to enable people to go home safely every day. And I'm combining my 25 years of technology experience as well as over a decade in the mining sector to put those solutions together, and really excited about AI and ML in our applications as well.
Thank you. And we have Janet next.
Hi, everybody. I am Janet, and I am managing partner at Real Ventures. Real Ventures is an early stage venture capital firm. We have offices in Montreal and Toronto, and our focus is, as I said, on leading early stage companies, and we've made several AI related investments.
Thank you, Janet. Next, we have Jen.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jen McLean, the VP of Research and Innovation at Aspire Food Group. My background has been in the innovation ecosystem in Canada for years, working with companies to support them in integrating the best of technologies from across the Canadian ecosystem. And now I've been working with Aspire to take that support in-house and help a really innovative company to do some amazing things. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, we have Michael.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Michael Cohen. I'm a co-founder of Key AI. We've created and go to market with an asset visualization platform that helps engineers inspect assets better. So think of what Zoom did for meetings in 2020, going remote, going in-house. We do the same. We move from in-field asset inspections to the in-office or at home. Thanks.
Amazing. Oh, apologies, I cut you off.
No, not needed.
Great, thank you, Michael. Okay, so as everyone can see and has heard, we have a really great variety of experts, of AI specialists who are going to be able to dive into this topic. If you have anything you'd like to share or questions, the Q&A box is there. You can go online as well, follow at Vector Institute, and you can also follow along with hashtag AI FastLane. Okay, so let's jump in. First question. Why do you think AI is important for all companies to incorporate as part of their growth strategy? I'm going to throw this first one to Janet. Get your thoughts on why do you think it's important?
Absolutely, great. So I love this question because we invest in a lot of different types of companies, and we talk to all of them about, hey, how are you using your data, and how are you using your data to get a competitive advantage? And so what I would say on this in terms of, why is AI important for all companies is because AI can give them a competitive advantage. And so it's not about, hey, using AI for the sake of using AI so that you can say, hey, I'm using AI, but it's about solving real world problems or taking advantage of opportunities. And so a couple of thoughts I'll add to that. First of all, we think about businesses in two ways, related to AI in two ways. We think about firms that are AI first and AI enabled. And what I mean by that is AI first are firms where their core product is based on AI. So this could be, for example, we have a company that is using AI. It's called Canvas. It's a member of the Vector Institute. It is using AI to significantly improve the manufacturing process. the product is based in AI. Then there's other companies that we call AI enabled, which would be a company that would exist in and of themselves, but they are using AI to improve their operations. And for this one, I'll use an example that everybody's heard of, Amazon. Amazon existed for a long time before, without AI, but they are using now AI to get much better. And so I think it's important when you think about your business, both types of businesses can obviously use AI. And I think the other thing that I would say about how businesses use AI is think about your entire spectrum of your business. And so for what I mean by that is we have seen and invested in companies that work with AI to improve the research and development process. We have companies that use AI to improve the manufacturing process, such as what I just mentioned. We have companies that use AI to improve the supply chain or the logistics or the marketing or the back-end operations around HR and finance. So again, AI really can take up several different forms, but it's important to think about, hey, as I establish my business and my strategy, how can I leverage AI to achieve a competitive advantage in one or multiple areas?
I think it's really interesting that you delved into how a business can use AI for their growth, the benefit of the business, how they're deploying it, and what type of AI they're using as well. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, but I would love to know, Jen, how you're deploying AI to help your company grow. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your company does.
Sure. So Aspire farms crickets. We are building the world's largest cricket farm in London, Ontario. It's technology enabled. It is the most revolutionary thing. I tell everybody all the time that I have to do this job because it really is the most fun. There's so many cool challenges to solve in taking what would have been a really traditional form of agriculture and farming insects and putting it into a tightly controlled, highly regulated precision environment so that we can get the highest yield at the best sustainability. So we use AI in a number of ways, everything from biological optimization of the crickets themselves, temperature regulation, monitoring our yields and our nutritional inputs, and integrating all of that together in order to make sure that we are making the best decisions. We're kind of in this intersection between biology and manufacturing, which is a weird space to be in. Manufacturing, there's nothing alive when you're making auto parts or something like that. But when you're playing with crickets or other organisms, there's a whole other level of knowledge that is and details that can't really be tracked using traditional methods. So by being able to leverage AI, we can monitor those really complicated problems and get insights that we absolutely would not be able to get without leveraging the power of AI.
And Gus, I'm curious, you have such I'd say variety and diverse amount of experience. What are your thoughts on when it comes to companies incorporating AI or why they should think about introducing AI into their growth strategy?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, one of the biggest conversations that we have on our side is obviously with the human resources shortage. Everybody's looking for more people, and they're having a hard time coming up with those resources, right, to keep their business moving forward. So where you would take traditional processes or traditional methods to be sustainable, they've got to be done much quicker. And they've got to be done with much more accuracy. So like we don't have time to spend on stories about the human biases that we have with what we think or feel is the truth. We just need to know the truth. So that's where I find that the AI and the implementation of AI in a system that helps really dig down deep into the data that's being collected to offer that support for the human decision makers. Huge value add, especially in the field. And in our case, making sure that people go home safely every day. One of the biggest contributors is a slight decision that was made to the left instead of to the right, and someone might not be coming home. So having an AI assisted platform to be able to cultivate what's been done in the past and offer good information, or if anything, validation for the decisions they're about to make, could really be the difference between life and death.
Now, Michael, Gus brought up something very interesting, and that's how you can apply AI to human resources, to talent. I'd love to hear from you, which is something that we discussed before today, about talent retention and how you can approach that.
Yeah, that's a major issue. Particularly, we're a Toronto-based company, and when you're in a very hot ecosystem, as a small, early stage scale-up company, recruitment's hard, retention's probably even harder. We've done something I think has been effective. It's creative. Of course, we like drones. We use drones to create an asset visualization platform. We apply computer vision in to be able to detect problems on assets like broken parts and corrosion and cracks. So it's a pretty attractive use case and problem to solve. It's really, really challenging. So recruitment tends to be easier than retention, because then, of course, people after about 2 years get really quite good, and we've got a lot of really big players with a lot of really interesting compensation packages, and really attractive for people to move on. So we've done a couple of things. We've focused really deliberately on our mission, and made sure that at the outset that was incredibly clear on what we were trying to do and how we were trying to take over the world. Compensation, of course, work experience. But on the AI side of things, we created a labs within our company, which is small. So and we donate about 30% of our time to what the AI scientists would like to work on that may be in the margins or periphery of what we're doing. And essentially, it's creating cool stuff that's all about professional development, all about engagement. And so my particular approach is, what do you want to work on? What's cutting edge? What's super cool? And let's spend a bunch of our time on that. And that's helped us retain.
Yes, I mean, that approach, I think, is applicable across different sectors as well. I think ensuring that your employees are engaged, that you offer professional development opportunities, that's two critical ways to ensure you retain and even attract talent as well. Michael, I want to follow up with that question and ask your thoughts on when it comes to location. So you mentioned you're in Toronto, and obviously over the last 2 years, there are many companies who have revisited where they intend to base their operations, perhaps in less expensive areas, and how they deal with employees who want to work remotely. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're an academic spinoff, so that's where it starts for us, is where are you getting, where are you close to the research, where are you close to the talent, the labs that are actually creating this sort of stuff. Of course, remote discussions are changing everything because you can work anywhere. Because it's a new industry and so much of the talent is young, it really becomes about lifestyle, cost of living, transit, all of those sorts of things we find are in the discussion at recruitment.
And for the rest of the panel, any thoughts or opinions on, remote, location, any of those items that I think over the last 2 years have become quite popular talking points when it comes to hiring, retention, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I think there's no one size fits all. And I have heard CEOs say, we're all going to be in the office. There's no other way. We need to be in the office. And I've heard other CEOs say, we're remote first. There's no other option, right? So but I think that this whole thing starts, and sort of building on Michael's point, it starts with, what is your value proposition to your team? And, again, it's not a one size fits all. And Michael talked about how he's doing it with his employees. And I think you need to think about, hey, your employees, what is going to be your unique value proposition? And for a lot of people, having that flexibility to choose to either work from home or not work from home is often a critical part of it. Because, as I said, I know several people who said, I'm dying to get back to the office. I can't work from my home. I've got to be around people. And others, employees who are just as passionate about, I need to work from home. I'm never going back. And so really thinking about, hey, how do you build that flexibility in? Or if your company, hey, you have to go a certain way, then then you decide, hey, we're going to go a certain way, and then find team members who embrace that way of work.
I see that there are a lot of questions that are coming in, which are really great. I may actually start integrating some of the audience questions with some of the questions that we already have. But thank you everyone for sending them in. They're so great. And I think they really, really embody the spirit of this conversation. But while I have you, Janet, I'm wondering maybe you could discuss any of the challenges, some of the biggest challenges that companies face when growing their AI capabilities, which seems to be a trend among some of the cues from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think on the one hand, talent, everybody will talk about talent. We're talking about talent, right? It's difficult. But I think another sort of different slant on it, what we find with our sort of smallish startups that are trying to grow is they may say, hey, here's going to be, my AI value proposition. And then it becomes a bit of a chicken and the egg in terms of getting the data, because often that data will come from your customers. And so it's like, okay, well, how can I get that data from my customers until I have a value proposition to offer them some sort of AI trained model that I can offer them in exchange for their data, but I can't really refine my AI models until I get the data, right? So it becomes, and I think that is one of the toughest things that a lot of startups face is how do I get that massive data to train my models so that they can be market ready? And a few things that we have seen is sometimes it can work if you work with pilot customers, perhaps on a very reduced cost base or on a free basis to just get their data and start training the models is one idea. But I think that whole area is something that a lot of early stage companies struggle with.
And one question from the audience that I really want to share, and I think this really plays into your answer, is there any grant funding for startups utilizing AI, and or what support is offered to startups? So Janet, if you'd like to answer, and then obviously I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in short, there are all sorts of different government programs, everything from probably the most commonly known as SHRED is to look into that and see whether you qualify for that. Certainly with Vector's Fast Track program, I would say, hey, look into that and see whether is that something that could benefit your firm.
And to the rest of the panel, any advice?
I'll add on that. Aspire has been hugely grateful for the amount of support we've gotten from different agencies. We've leveraged funding from all kinds of size and scope, from small grants doing early stage research all the way through to large amounts of funding from the folks at Sustainable Development Technologies Canada, Agri Innovate, Engine, Supercluster. There's NRC IRAP that you can look at, MyTax, OCE. There's a plethora of funding options that are out there that can be tailored to the type of question and the type of problem that you're trying to solve. So is it a large scale partnership that you need with other firms in order to support the development? Is it a research question you're trying to solve with an academic researcher? There's funding available for all across the spectrum of that.
Thank you. And Gus, Michael, any tips or advice for startups or entrepreneurs who are trying to navigate this journey?
Yeah, I think if I had to maybe offer some lessons learned through the process, because there is quite a bit of funding available. Where the key factor is, and where we had to get really, really good at, is be very clear on the problem we're trying to solve and spend a lot of time into the planning. So, most grants are not attributed overnight. It takes a while to go through them. But for the most part, if you don't have the plan really well laid out of what you're trying to achieve, it's going to be a tough journey. So if anything, that would be the advice that I have to say, especially for small business. You may be challenging the unknowns, and you might be wanting to dig in and find some problems you want to solve. But if you really want to get that support, you kind of got to get ahead of the game there and figure out what you're trying to solve and why you're trying to solve it, and that'll pay major dividends.
And Michael, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Since we're on grants and Janet's here, I'll throw this out. A famous venture capitalist was speaking and made a big impression on me that when you're failing at venture capital, what most people do is they go back and they fix their deck, when what they should do is go back and fix their company. AI companies are not. I think the basis of getting grants, which is missed by early stage companies, is really if you're building a good company. So you've got the right foundational pieces. You're probably fundable, whether or not grants or not. But really, even from a 2 or 3 person, focusing on is it a good growth possible company is probably where to begin. Good company first.
And I'm also curious, we've talked about grants and finances, but do you have any suggestions for entrepreneurs who are looking for perhaps mentorship, who are looking to meet others, to find resources, et cetera? Obviously, there's Vector. Any thoughts on how an entrepreneur should go about that or think about that?
If that's for me, I'd be happy to answer it. And this is something that I probably very quickly understood my mistakes and corrected them. There's probably 3 groups. I think incubators in Canada have fantastic people. I think if you want to grow a company in Canada, there is, and this was new to me, there's fantastic government people. So the people that are in ISAD, FedDev, that are working are incredible resources. And then there's mentorship programs. I'm part of a tech company which gathers and aggregates tech CEOs, and I sit in a roundtable every month. If you can get yourself around people who have had success building similar to the same type of companies, those people are worth every minute that you can get of their time.
Yeah, I would just say, just to double down on that, what I see our most successful founders doing is building a network of other founders whom they can learn from. And Michael described, hey, maybe you might be able to join a group, but don't think you need to have a formal group in order to find those people. Like, reach out to them, whether it's reaching out via LinkedIn or whatever. And I think the other thing, and emphasize, hey, can we go for coffee or virtual coffee and just chat? And ideally, when you're doing that reach out, you're thinking always about these interactions as being a two-way street, and not just, can I sit down for half an hour and pick your brain? Which I just hate that expression. I hate getting those emails. It's like, no, you can't pick my brain. It's small enough to serve it. But I don't want anybody picking my brain. But it's like, maybe we can sit down and share learnings, and here's some things that I can share. And then just building those relationships into trusted partners and trusted colleagues that you can get so much from those relationships.
And I really like how you emphasize building relationships and also virtual and in real life. There are many people who they cannot meet in person, or they feel uncomfortable doing that. So doing that online or virtually is still a great way to build relationships. And as long as you have an internet connection, you can do that. I want to go to one of our questions from the audience. Are other technologies required to support AI, sensors, for example? Is there anyone who would like to touch on that? Or not, we can come back to it.
I mean, I think I'll just say it depends on what type of data you're using, right? And so, yes, if you're using manufacturing data from a manufacturing plant, you may need sensors in order to get the data, right? If you're using, let's say you're using AI to optimize marketing, then you're going to need a very different data source. So it really just depends. You got to figure out, hey, where am I going to get that data? And by the way, I see there's a question, AI models need fuel, and quality data is the best type of fuel. Do you have any creative ways of generating labeled data sets? So for supervised learning. And I think, what I have seen in companies, I mean, what is sometimes, hey, I have one company that used interns and got some co-op students to work as interns to help them, because it was a very time-consuming labeling process. So I don't know if that's overly creative, but it was effective for that particular company.
Which brings me to my next question, unless there's someone else who would like to add to that, but I agree, Jen. I think maybe some more specificity in that question would have been able to help direct it. But what would you consider as a major growth area or opportunities for startups or scale-ups that are deploying AI? So trends. Is there anyone who would like to tackle that? Michael, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to tackle this, and I think I'll try and be specific, particularly with with our business. So we provide visualization and computer vision into the energy market. So we think of that as nuclear, oil and gas, electrical, and renewable, solar and wind. I'll give you one growth opportunity that we see in oil and gas. That market's referred to it as the great crew shift. And by the way, we're talking a lot about the great resignation right now. So the great crew shift refers to this reality that was very much analog for years, in which you had someone, say, chief inspector at a refinery. Her name, Anne. She ran the refinery for 25 years. She carried a notebook. She had maybe some filing cabinet. She maybe had some artifacts, some CAD, that sort of thing. She knew every valve, every piece of equipment. She knew how to shut it down, start it up. She was brilliant. And Anne retires. And all of that knowledge transfer now leaves the organization on how to run. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity now within computer vision to replicate what Anne knows and to be able to give that to the first employee on a new employee on their first day, to be able to augment all of this information and create a digital environment. And then once you've created a digital environment, of course, you're able to apply artificial intelligence into do things like replicate Anne's vision on what pumps weren't running properly, what was hot, what was cold, what was broken. And so this great crew shift. And by the way, I think the same sort of thing applies. We see this in construction, we see it in all sorts of industries. And I think when I look at British Columbia right now, and I think about the $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill that was just passed, this sort of knowledge transfer that needs to go from analog to digital happens for road repairs, restoration, bridges, all of this infrastructure that we think is okay, and we're learning isn't.
It's a great answer. I wonder, is there anyone else in the panel who would like to add to that? I mean, it's a very big question, and opportunities that exist and growth for startups and scale-ups. It's a very large question. But Janet, for instance, do you have any comments or ideas?
Yeah, so we invest across a wide range of industries and a wide range of technologies. So, and I fundamentally think that technology and AI specifically will transform every single industry. And so, where is the opportunity? Pretty well in every industry. So I would say two things. First of all, one place where we think that there's going to be exponential growth is where technology is starting to take hold, but it's in the early stages of taking hold. So for instance, one example is construction. Construction industry is absolutely massive. It is just on the start of leveraging technology. So we think that's an area where there's huge growth opportunities. So I think that's one area. But then the second thing is, for the entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs out there who are thinking about this, again, I would go back to say, hey, there's opportunity in a lot of places, and think about, hey, what gets you most excited? What industries do you know about? Where do you have a unique insight that you can take your technology, and where your technology is really going to be a game changer for participants in that industry?
And Jen, I'm really curious to ask you this question, to pose this question to you, but also I want to follow up and ask, if you do run a business, how can you find opportunities within that existing business to deploy AI? Because I know your business is using it, but maybe people wouldn't initially pair AI with crickets.
It's such a good point. And honestly, I think the main thing with AI is it doesn't really matter what industry you're in, where you work, what it is, it applies everywhere. And the main thing that we have to know is what problem you're trying to solve. What challenge are you trying to address? And having that clear articulation of what that challenge is will allow enough impactful AI solutions to be deployed. And it's that translation of the business problem to an actual solution that has to be very clear, so that this find your bottleneck. What is the piece that is giving me problems, costing me too much money, taking too much time, and then figuring out what data you can collect in order to better address that, and then deploying an AI model that would leverage that data to address the specific problem that you have. There's lots of times where an AI solution or any other technology solution is deployed and it completely misses the challenge that would be most impactful for the business. It'll be deployed, it'll be cool, but the actual bottom line for the business won't change. The problem has not been addressed. So it's that translation of the business need into what the technology can bring. So the AI model, how it can streamline things. It's that translation that is so critical. And I think that's why we're at a really interesting point right now in Canada with this intersection, because 5 years ago, AI was a buzzword. Companies would call me and say, hey, can you get me the AI? And I'd say, oh, not yet, clearly. But now we have the talent, we have a much better articulation of business and how AI can be deployed. So that translation can actually happen from a business challenge and where it will be impactful to delivering a right technology solution.
Yeah, and I would just say, just to double down on that, just as is make sure, like I 100% agree with everything that Jen said, and just to double down on that, I think if you are adopting AI into your business, be very clear on what KPIs you are hoping that AI will address, and then tracking those KPIs to say, hey, is this AI really delivering the business benefit that I hoped it would deliver?
And apologies, just had to run a little bit to get my charger. I hope that wasn't too disruptive. We do have a question. It touches on what was just shared, but I'm going to read it in full. And I want to pose it to the entire panel. Benefits of AI are already evident for large operations. For more traditional, old school types of business, is there a minimum business size necessary to start successfully adopting AI solutions? So this is for the entire panel. Is there anyone who would like to jump in?
I think business size, it could be any business size, to be honest, to take advantage. The biggest thing is how you tackle the challenge or the project with the business, and also making sure that you have very, very clear and articulated communications with them for what the expectation is going to be. Because I think for the most part, we look at large organizations that collect, tens of thousands of lines of data per day, and a smaller organization will only collect maybe 100, right? So articulating that you need the volume of data to really be able to start getting into the nuts and bolts of how powerful AI can be. So having that conversation around patience and integrity, like just keep supplying the wheel, and we're gonna get there together. Because that's the biggest question that I get all the time. We're day 2 in deployment, and then when's it gonna tell me how to do my stuff, right? You need a little bit of time. Like it needs to curate the data. It needs to find out. It needs to see what are the patterns. So you can't establish a pattern in 48 hours, right? So I think for me, that's the biggest thing that I would probably interject on that is just clearly articulate the scope and the specific timeline based on the size of the company, based on how much data they're willing to submit to the system. And that's the other piece, is that not everybody's willing to give the data to the engine. So then it's really hard to get the output. But having that two-way conversation with all the stakeholders and making sure you have a really clear plan forward, and having a project charter that spans out to where success will lie and what success will look like, the KPIs, like as Janet brought up earlier, I think are very critical.
And for the rest of the panel, any thoughts or comments on that? Gus, I agree, there is no best size for a business. As Jen shared before, there's no one size that fits all. Every business will have to think about how that relates to their goals, what they intend to achieve. But for the panel, any advice or comments?
I'd just add that it doesn't come down to the size of the company, but the size and the quality of the data that you're collecting. So that's the most crucial part. So if AI is planned for you, it is part of the journey that you see. Start planning ahead and making sure that you have your data collected, curated, clean, all of the essential things in order to train the algorithm that you will use eventually.
And there was a follow-up question to your answers, and it was, how do you deal with the possibility of incorrect labeling from AI? As you know, Jennifer, you mentioned it's only the solutions created are only as good as the data that you receive. So how do you deal with bad data?
I'm going to let one of the AI experts answer that. I more use it. I'm not one of the data scientists that can do it.
I'll jump on that since this is very much in our lane. This is a really informed question. The person understands what's behind the problem with labeling. You know, you create a company that's going to create artificial intelligence, and what you discover very early on is that you need a human in the loop. That at the start of training data, you need someone to label it properly, and then as you iterate and create and go along, you still need to bring people back in. And the problem in many industries is the labeling of data requires a subject matter expert. So maybe just classifying sheep in a field, maybe that's very easy for anyone, so you can hire interns to do that sort of thing. But when you're looking at really complex problems in industries, well, for instance, oil and gas, as I've mentioned, you need someone with decades or years of experience to be able to sit down and label that data accurately. And so this person's pointing out part of the problem is industry has created shops that are able to do that, and they do that incorrectly. And of course, poor data in results in bad data out or bad outcomes. So the question, I love this question. How do you get a subject matter expert to stop their job, sit down and label your data? That's tough. How we solve that, by the way, is we engage the user, what we call human-centric or user-created AI. So every time you use our platform, you actually are creating the training data that's fueling your own neural network, because we just couldn't find people, subject matter experts. We couldn't pay them enough. Mind you, we didn't have the budgets to be able to create training data for use cases like marine corrosion on offshore oil platforms. Just impossible.
And Michael, you mentioned earlier on how beneficial it can be to have academic partnerships or corporate partnerships, especially if you're a startup who's early stage. I'm wondering, this is a question from the audience, how do you go about creating those partnerships? And for the panel after Michael, any advice on how to do that as well? So for Michael.
That was, I'm sorry, I didn't pick up on the cue of after Michael.
No.
So the question then is how to create academic and larger
partnerships. Yeah, how do you start to facilitate that type of conversation, whether academic or corporate, if you're early stage?
Well, you know, Janet said network. If you're looking to build something, you get out of the office, you walk into other offices, you walk into labs, you introduce yourself to those organizations that have relationships, whether or not it's government does internships and they fund these sorts of things for master's students, pre-doctorate, incubators, those sorts of things. So I wouldn't expect anyone to have difficulty walking into a Canadian college or university. Their doors are open. I'm not sure that's quite a COVID relevant statement, but generally in normal times, it is. On the organization side of things, because this focus on innovation, particularly the technology class of artificial intelligence, I find virtually everyone has an innovation center or centers of excellence that wants to meet small companies, that's looking for creators. And so go find those. If you have to go through their venture arm, in which it seems to me every organization has a venture arm, go that way. If you got to go through their R&D, fine. But there's someone who's thinking about innovation, and just go find them.
And Jennifer, I'm curious about what you think of that question, especially since you run your own business. Any advice on how to, build those partnerships, whether academic or corporate?
Yeah, for sure. So collaboration is like my main thing that I do all of the time. Bringing in the right expertise from the right folks in order to solve a problem more quickly. It's the best way to get something accomplished. And Aspire has been glad to work with all kinds of partners, like Darwin AI is one of our key partners on the AI side of things. But really what I've found the best way in order to both find those partners and then build effective long-term collaborations, finding them, there's a lot of support organizations that will work with you to help articulate the business challenge that you have, help to design exactly what kind of partner you need in order to solve that problem. So the folks at MyTax, the folks at NGen, the other superclusters, there's lots of government investment into those support agencies that will help you to do that. And then when you're articulating the collaboration, you have to make sure that there's benefit for both sides, so that both firms are able to get some new knowledge, some new information, some new talent, something that will advance their business as well as supporting yours. So it really is about creating that two-way street, being open to sharing, trusting each other, and actually building something together. One of the things that I think in Canada we need to do is to recognize that we are not actually really competitors with ourselves. We need to collaborate here in order to compete on the global stage. So, working together, being more open, more trusting in what other companies and other research organizations can bring to your company will help to advance you on a much faster scale.
Wow, yeah, collaboration, not competition with other Canadian startups. I think that's definitely really great advice that it's going to stick with me. I love that. For the rest of the panelists, any thoughts? If not,
I think
yes,
something
please.
something good to possibly research as well, especially in academia, is to find out which institution is trying to solve a problem themselves in whichever industry of target. And as soon as you find that or that balance, as far as like you're sharing a vision there for that specific industry or the possible problems. So now you've got a really good leg up to build a really good relationship with that department at that institution and solve a problem together, which then opens the door for a massive amount of collaboration as well as contact building. The number one thing that I think that I did starting this business was immediately attach myself to colleges and universities. It was the number one thing on my hit list, and they're there for a reason. I mean, they're spending a lot of time learning a lot of great things, and they want to solve challenges. They want to solve problems in the real world and expose their faculty and students to real life problems instead of potentially classroom generated problems that may not solve anything. So latching into the industry of choice with who's trying to tackle that industry with some problems and diving in together has been something that's been groundbreaking for us anyways so far.
Yes, Gus, I think that's a very important point, that these partnerships or collaborations with academic institutions benefit both parties. So it's in both organizations' interest to reach out and work together. It's a great way to think about that when entrepreneurs are reaching out. There is one question that caught my eye just now, and thank you again, everyone. I'm going through the questions as fast as I can. If we don't get to them, you can reach out to Vector Institute. You can follow online at hashtag that I mentioned earlier. So, question. I would like to get a read from the panelists on funding AI startups. As either recipients or providers of funds, my experience with VCs is that they are all looking to invest in potential unicorns. If the startup has good prospects for a profitable business, but is unlikely to ever get to the unicorn stage, is it likely to get attention from investors? And I'm going to start with Janet.
Great. So thank you very much for this question. And I think it's a very good point that not all successful businesses should be or can be backed by VCs, right? It's like venture capital is all in the news today, and this company raised this much money from venture capital or whatever, right? And we need to remember, actually, the vast majority of growing small, medium businesses are not invested in by venture capital, right? When you look beyond the tech business. And so I would say, yes, what you need to do is you need to understand the strategy of your investor. For not all, but for the vast majority of venture capital investors, they are focused on every investment they invest in. They want to get at least a 10x return. So they are looking to invest in potential unicorns. And so, hey, if you've got, to the question, if you've got a great profitable business, then I would say a couple of things. Look for other, so first of all, do you even need financing, or can you self-finance? Again, lots of great businesses are built that never raise external funding. Secondly, if you need funding, then often what is helpful is angel investors or individual investors who have a different return profile than venture capital firms. It's another option. Or we talked earlier about grants. And then finally, if you do have a profitable business, look into getting loans, right? The banks are more flexible than ever before in terms of extending credit. Not to mention there's things such as BDC or players such as Espresso Capital, which will loan against your regular ongoing revenue.
That's a very good point. And I agree. I think if you look at the front page of most newspapers, online, tech sections, they do tend to talk and discuss VCs and the, record-breaking amounts that we're seeing invested into the tech sector right now. But you're right, there are other options, and not all businesses may align with the expectations of VCs.
Yeah, exactly. Or what I always say, like raising venture round is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end, and the end is building a successful business. And venture funding is only one of many ways to build that business.
I'm curious, Janet, what do you look for in a startup?
So I categorize what we look for in two big buckets. One is the business itself, and we look at, hey, what is the vision? What is the strategy behind the business? Exactly like the person asked the question, can this be $1 billion business, right? And then it's sort of like business 101 type of things, competitive mode, unit economics, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other big thing that we look at is the founders. And the key question for us with the founders is, hey, once we understand the strategy and the vision of the business and we get behind that, then the next question is, okay, is this the team that can help to realize that vision? And on that, we're not looking for somebody necessarily who has built a $1 billion business or can do it all themselves. What we're looking for are people who can learn and develop, who are very focused on their own development, and very importantly, can attract, retain, and motivate people around them who will complement them. And those are the types of things that we're looking for there.
And for the rest of the panel, any ideas, advice, thoughts when it comes to startups who are looking at VC support?
So I'd love to jump in for no other reason than I can tell my team that I followed Janet on a venture capital question. So I can't resist. It's going to make my day. The asker of the question, I'd be a little bit more optimistic about that. Not every venture capital, which is a competitive market, venture capital firm can get in on unicorn deals. So therefore, they have to have different business models. They have to have different thesis for their investment, from early stage seed through to Series A, through to looking to go public. There's a lot of competition on that, and therefore funds, depending on size or depending on thesis, could absolutely look to invest in a company that has aspirations of building a 50, 100, 150, $200 million profitable business. So I'd be optimistic that you don't need to be a unicorn. I mean, I'd go venture debt anyway, maybe do it just on a profitability would be great. I think that's well taken, but so I'm not sure this is fair, but there you go, Janet.
Awesome. Love that you followed me, and I can tell my team that I followed you on another question. So.
Right on.
And just to recap, earlier in the conversation, our panelists did share that there are grants. There are, Janet mentioned the banks as well, and there are partnerships and collaborations where you're able to tap into funding and finances and growth opportunities as well. So of course, there are a variety of options. VCs aren't the only one. Another really great question is how much data is required to ensure the adequate training of an AI solution? Do small, medium businesses typically generate sufficient data to effectively use AI? I want to start off this discussion by asking Jen, if that's okay.
Oh, I have to punt again because it's
right.
that's not my expertise. I'll pass it back to Michael probably on that.
Yeah.
Just for everyone, no one asked me anything at the last webinar I did, so this is balancing out. So thanks for the privilege here. This is a really interesting thing. So circa like 2018, a lot of companies came to the market with really strong marketing campaigns that they were AI companies. And what was understood about that was, one, AI was tough, and two, you needed an absolutely ton of data to get to really good results. The academics and industry intelligence has moved really, really quickly, and that's just old news at this point. So 5,000 points of data to get to something that has some efficacy is just no longer the case. We have techniques in supervised, unsupervised learning, that sort of thing, something called few shot learning, in which you can get from 5,000 data points down to a few hundred and make them perform like they're much greater size data sets than they actually are. So credit to the bright people that have created this, but in many cases you need small amounts of data today to get to pretty good results.
And any comments from the rest of the panel? Gus, perhaps?
No, I think that's just to echo what Michael brought up. It's it all depends again on the quality of data and how it aligns, like how the data that's coming in is aligned to the model. So if you built your model a little loose and the information is coming in a little loose, it'll take a little longer. But if you start with a very prescriptive method of, this is the data I want, this is the data that I'm digesting, this is the output I'm looking for, I mean, you risk the chance of some biases being created along the way, but at least you can start measuring the effectiveness, or at least you start diving in and creating paths forward from clean data, and not necessarily have to spend a whole lot of time sanitizing large sets of data that were not structured. So I think the size of the data strongly depends, to Jennifer's point earlier, the quality of data and how it's being monitored.
And you mentioned bias. Oh, apologies. I think someone wanted to share something else.
Yeah, Gus took what I wanted to say. He's absolutely right. You know, a couple of years ago, there was a big focus on refixing and retooling your algorithm. And as Gus pointed out, now there's a huge focus on quality of data. It's called MLOps. And so that's proving out to get really great results out of less data. Great one, Gus.
And Gus, you mentioned bias, and I think that's a very important topic to discuss with the time that we have left. There's been a lot of talk for years, but I think in recent months, the discussion has perhaps heightened a little bit about diversity. And as we mentioned, garbage in, garbage out, the data that you receive, which is utilized across society, which can have major implications. If it doesn't have a diverse workforce, it doesn't have diverse scientists who are analyzing that data, it can cause huge problems. So I'm wondering, how can we talk about this? What solutions are in place? And I put this towards the whole panel. I feel like a lot of times when these questions come about, they're directed at the women or people of color on the panels. This is for everyone. We're talking about diversity and eliminating bias from data. How can we go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great one. So thanks for bringing that to me to answer, because we've been doing a fair amount of work in that sense, to the point where sometimes we get called a little crazy about how we collect data. And one of the fundamentals. So if we look at the sector that I'm the problems that I'm trying to solve right now in health and safety, since the beginning of time, and since starting this journey, the only real data that we have are from health and safety professionals. Right? So how can you tell what's going on with the workforce? How can you tell what's going on with upper management? How can you tell what's going on with a frontline supervisor from the interpretation of what's happening through a health and safety manager? It makes no sense to me, right? So we challenge our partners to say, put a device in everybody's hands. Everybody's got a cell phone anyways. They have to put it in their locker when they come to work, as it is. So it's not like there's a huge technology barrier there. They're all coming in, no matter what age. They're texting with their grandkids. It doesn't matter what it is, right? So allow them to contribute to the data, allow them to put in their own words and from their own experiences what is happening on a day-to-day basis. And you can correlate it to what the health and safety manager said, but at least by having that much more diverse pool of information, a lot of things end up happening. So one is the workforce ends up being a lot more engaged into the day-to-day because they feel like they're contributing to the planning efforts, to the big picture. They are actively adding to the solutions model, so to speak. And, you know, one of the things that we were looking at, because especially in mining, I mean, it's like 98% male, right? So it's, you know, how do we know that this is not a problem with women? We're not, you know, we haven't been collecting that data. So like everybody has to be part of the system. And then you almost have to factor in what that offset is in order to get true data. Because if you just leave the data as it is and you say, well, you know what, we know there's 98% male and that's it, and then that's what we got. Well, you're just going to continue getting the same answer over and over and over again without really capturing the outliers or the real information that's coming in from the workplace diversity, right? So when we speak to our clients, a lot of times their sole focus is, I want to put this in the hands of my managers and my auditors. Okay, that's one layer. Now let's work at getting everyone in the organization, including the accounting. You know, so sometimes we forget that, you know, part of health and safety might have been a lot of turnover because maybe the wages weren't competitive, or maybe, you know, all these things. So that's all data that's valuable, because if you're getting hurt in the workplace because you're getting new employees every 20 days, I mean, it's good to have that information, other than no, employees have just made some wrong decisions in the field and then just pass the blame. So switch it from a blame culture and bring it back into a collaborative culture and include everybody: HR, accounting, training systems, field support, field management, project management. One of our use cases that we've been fortunate to have, there's an organization that we work with, Technica Mining. Every single person of the organization has a device and is able to contribute to the data. And the CEO revealed that there's information that he would have to work weeks and send people off into sea cans and then in the abyss to go find something that he thought from his gut. Now he's got everything in the palm of his hands and he's able to click on it every single morning and also give positive recognitions back for the work well done and the contributions that that individual has served into the data set. So then it becomes a really strong 360 loop of information, right? That's where we need to be in data collection, to start removing some of those biases and having every diverse piece of information you can find.
And before I forget, there was someone in the comments who asked, Gus, how can we help with your diversity efforts? Gus is online. So again, as we said earlier, connecting online is a really great way to connect with not just the panelists, but experts in your field across the country or around the world. And so for the rest of the panel, any advice or thoughts or suggestions or discussion points on what needs to happen to help increase diversity in order to remove bias from data collection?
I'll chime in and just say that I'm grateful to hear the attention that Gus is paying to this. It's fantastic to see that. And I think one of the crucial things that we have to do is to be intentional on diversity from beginning to end. So hiring talent that is diverse will then make sure that you are getting diverse inputs. You will make sure that the data is, if it's being labeled data, it has to be labeled or tagged. It's being labeled with a diversity of perspectives and opinions. You're not just going to get, if you're tagging vision images as person and they only tag the men in it as an extreme example. But having that really intentional, diverse workforce from the beginning to the end will make sure that what we're putting into the algorithms will be a diverse data set and will better reflect what the population actually looks like.
Yes, great advice. You have to be intentional. It doesn't just happen, as Jennifer shared.
To echo on that, Jennifer, one of the challenges that I put out there quite a few times, because being that I come from technology and then kind of went into mining, and I started working with the tools and worked my way up to project management. I was always the IT guy, right? But I did learn the industry really well, so I can do this. But I was always the IT guy, and something that I really pushed out there is that there's a lot of complex problems that are happening every day. That if you just remove the burden of the past and bring in a group that has not experienced those problems, you have groundbreaking results. So to my point, I was like, if you want a mine to operate like it's never operated before, get a technology company to buy a mine and watch it go. And I'm not saying that they're better, it's just that they're not burdened by the past, and they will likely break barriers. Because something that I get challenged with all the time is that if you have a process step 1 to 10, what happens a lot in mining in particular is they'll remove step 3 and 6 and expect that 10 will happen without fail. There's no logic to it, right? We'll just pull through and make it work. So now we're working 2 times as hard because we've omitted 2 steps for no reason and still expect the result. It's just not right. So it's about bringing back that thought space at the table, saying, okay, we didn't get the results we needed. We removed steps 3 and 4 and 6. The sequencing, if you ever want to get down into the AI realm, or if you want to get into robotics, this can't happen. You'll have catastrophic failure every time. So there's no difference with humans. We build processes, follow them, and adhere them. And sometimes what I find is that even somebody that's coming in from a completely different industry that's not even familiar with industry at all, they will have a set of experience of how they solve the problem in a similar way somewhere else and really have some groundbreaking results.
And I am very aware that we are actually almost out of time. Apologies to those who shared comments, questions that I wasn't able to get to. But I am going to end today's panel with one question to everyone. And that is, what did you wish you knew when you started your company or your AI journey that you know now? So I'm going to start with Gus, and then we will, and if you could be somewhat short, maybe concise, 30 seconds or so, that'd be great.
If your intention is to include AI is the product. Probably my biggest learning is, instead of having to build your entire solution and then refactoring for AI, think about AI first. It will help you really build the foundation for your product that will be leveraging AI and save you a lot of time and aggravation. So that's it for me.
And Jennifer?
Sure, yeah, on a similar vein, setting up your data sets appropriately from the get-go, so you don't have to rejig and clean and make different data sets talk to each other after the fact. If you know that there's going to be some AI deployed, speak to somebody that can help you to set up your data sets early so that it will be able to work within an AI algorithm.
And Michael?
What I wish I knew, Python, C++, and math.
Got to give us more. You got to give us more on that.
I wish I knew how much creating AI is a very human-centric activity from an early stage company perspective. You need to label data, you need to acquire data, you need to train data. This is all about people to get to good outcomes.
Something I'm sure many people forget in the early stages. And lastly, Janet.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I would say, if you are listening to this, if you're involved in this field and you don't consider yourself an AI expert, don't worry. You are still extremely valuable, and in some case, and you bring a unique experience set, almost like we were just talking about diversity. Because often it's the people who are not steeped in the technology who will ask the questions around, okay, well, wait a minute, how is this going to impact our KPIs? How is this, what's the business case? What's the ROI on this investment? And you absolutely need those people who are going to be asking those questions. And so there's a unique role that everybody can play.
Well, great way to end our panel. So much great advice. I will say again that #AI FastLane, if you want to continue this conversation online. And there were a couple questions that were relevant to Vector when it came to support and funding. I'm sure you can go online and contact someone at the Institute. And of course, if you signed up for today's session, there obviously has a contact address that you can reach out there as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Vector.
Thank you. Great, insightful conversation. It's very inspiring to hear how these companies are incorporating AI into their business to grow it. Thank you very much to all of our panelists and to Takara, our moderator, as well as to Ed Clark and Minister Fedeli for providing remarks today. Finally, to our audience, thank you for tuning in and joining us. Please stay tuned to your YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel, Vector has a YouTube channel, for our video recording of this event that you can rewatch and get more from it. And of course, if you do have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us about participating in our FastLane program or the upcoming Intro to AI courses starting in the new year. More information can be found on our website, which has been dropped into the chat for your reference. Thank you and goodbye.